It was a warm summer night when James and his friends set out on a long road trip through the vast, desolate highways. They were heading toward a secluded lake cabin to spend the weekend away from the city. James, Mark, and Sarah had driven through the day, and as night fell, they grew weary, their eyes heavy with the long hours of driving. "Let's take a break at the next stop," James suggested, his voice rough from hours of conversation and music. The road was isolated, with only the occasional flicker of distant lights or the far-off glow of a passing truck. It was the kind of highway where travelers often found themselves alone, and the lonely pit stops had a strange aura about them. After a few more miles, the familiar sign of a gas station came into view. The station, though isolated, was a welcome sight, dimly lit, with an old-fashioned gas pump and a faded sign that read, "Open 24 hours." The place seemed a bit run down, but it was better than nothing. They pulled up to the pump, the only car in the lot. The gas station attendant, a man with wild, unkempt hair and a thick stubble, stepped out from behind the counter with a strange look in his eyes. He didn't greet them, but simply stared. His face had a grim, distant quality, almost like he wasn't fully present. "Fill up?" he asked in a low, gravelly voice. "Yeah," James replied, trying to ignore the eerie feeling crawling up his spine. He noticed there were no other cars, and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead made the place feel like something out of a forgotten nightmare. As the gas started flowing, the group of friends decided to stretch their legs. They walked toward the small convenience store inside the station, hoping to grab some snacks and get back on the road quickly. The air around them was strangely still, as if the world outside had stopped moving. Sarah, always the adventurous one, wandered down a narrow hallway at the back of the store. "I'll be right back," she called out, disappearing into the dim corridor. James and Mark wandered around the dusty shelves when they heard Sarah's voice echoing from the back. "Guys?" she called, her tone urgent, as if something was wrong. "Sarah?" Mark called back, his voice laced with concern. The two rushed down the hall and found her standing at the entrance to a small locked room. It looked like a maintenance area or storage space, but something about it made their skin crawl. Sarah was pale, her hand trembling as it rested on the cold metal door. I heard something in there," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not sure what it was, but it didn't sound right." James felt a knot in his stomach. "What do you mean? What did you hear?" "I don't know. Whispering. Footsteps." Sarah's voice faltered. "It was like someone, or something, was moving around in there." Mark, always the skeptic, snorted. "It's probably just rats or something. This place is falling apart." But James wasn't convinced. The air in the room felt wrong, thick with something he couldn't explain. Something deep within him screamed to leave. They turned to head back to the front of the store, when suddenly, the door to the maintenance room creaked open on its own. The attendant appeared in the doorway, his face still blank, but his eyes were different now. The pupils were unnaturally wide, dilated, and his expression seemed void of any human emotion. He stared at them for a long moment, making no move to speak, just standing there like a sentry. "Everything okay?" James asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The attendant's lips curled into a thin, unsettling smile. "Just making sure everything is in order. You should leave soon. This road is dangerous after dark." James tried to shake off the growing sense of dread as he turned to leave. He couldn't explain it, but something was terribly wrong about this place. The air felt heavy, the silence oppressive, and as they stepped outside, the faint sounds of whispering filled the air once again. As they returned to the car, the hairs on the back of James's neck stood up. He glanced back at the gas station, but to his shock, the attendant was no longer standing outside. In fact, the whole station seemed strangely still, as if no one had ever been there at all. The lights flickered and the shadows grew longer. Then a high-pitched scream pierced the air. It was Sarah. James and Mark turned to see her standing by the car, frozen in terror. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. But it wasn't her fear that chilled them. It was the sight behind her. In the distance, just past the gas station's pumps, figures began to materialize. Dark, twisted shapes that crawled and lurched toward her. Their faces were distorted, mouths gaping open in silent screams, their eyes empty voids. "Get in the car!" Mark shouted, but it was too late. The figures closed in on Sarah, who was now backed against the car, too terrified to move.